Hi, this is the Social Gelo with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Gelo with Angelo show.
What's up, and welcome to this episode of Social Gelo with Angelo. What is Kajukembo? Now, I run the Social Gelo with Angelo podcast, but it's not the Kajukembo podcast, but I'm always talking about Kajukembo. And I realize I always tell people to Google Kajukembo. So today I have Rowland. I'm not even going to try to say whatever last name you put there. And also I have John Hackleman and Ron Esteller. Ron, GM Ron, is that right? Grandmaster Ron Esteller?
If you want to go there, I don't go there.
That's Grandmaster John Hackleman? Is that right, John?
I'm the pitmaster.
He's the pitmaster. You say no, he's the pitmaster. Okay. So
promoted.
Well, one thing I do want to say before we get started, I want to congratulate John on some excellent work. Congratulations with Glover and his championship in the UFC. That's just awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good representation of Kajukembo, actually, the lineage.
Yeah, that was just awesome. So before we get started, before we start talking, I always tell my listeners when I mention Kajukembo, I'm like, just Google it and you'll see what it is. So let's Google it. Share my screen. I Googled it here. So let's see here. Share. Let's get out of Facebook real quick. And can you all see my screen right now? Is that visible? And there's a picture of John. No, I did not. Guy? Seriously, I didn't plan this. I Googled, if you look at my screen, I just Googled Kajukembo and a picture of John shows up. Also a picture of Renato shows up here too in the corner. And we just scroll down. It says Kajukembo is a hybrid martial art from Hawaii. It was developed in the late 1940s and founded in 1947 in the Palama settlement of Palama, Hawaii. The name Kajukembo is a combination of various arts from which style is derived: Ka for karate, Ju for judo, and jujitsu, Ken for kempo, and Bo for boxing. And then from there, the Wikipedia page will go into a long spiel of a bunch of other stuff in history. But my last podcast, I wasn't trying to do it about Kajukembo. It was just about us drinking. And for some reason, we ended up in the horrid waters of what is Kajukembo. And I avoided as much as I could the conversation because I didn't want to get all serious. Yeah. So I decided maybe I should have a whole podcast about it. And that's why you guys are here. So what is your definition of Kajukembo? Let's start with Ron. What's your definition of Kajukembo?
That it's not a style, but a mindset.
All right.
There's curriculum and there's different curriculum, but there wasn't at the beginning. Does there have to be? I think that's the good thing about it is it's left up to each individual branch style person. And it fits, you fit it, it doesn't fit you. That's just my take.
All right. Well, what's your definition of Kajukembo, John?
What's the other guy's name with on the end with the beard?
With the beard, Rob. That's Rob.
Rob.
The young guy's Rob. Yeah.
Rob. Yeah. Okay. So what's my I guess the literal definition would be, karate, judo, jujitsu, kempo, boxing. It is I grew up in Hawaii. I started really young there, and I started with Kajukembo young, and it was a mindset, like Grandmaster said. It's a mindset, and it was a very strict mindset back in my day, the early 70s. There was a lot of probably because of my branch. Not my branch, but the branch that I came through. It was a very violent mindset. I saw a lot of brutal things happen in and out of competitions. There wasn't your typical Karate Kid, Miyagi, it wasn't a nice bunch of guys. And let's not forget, I mean, it was started it was started with a bunch of locals, not to protect themselves. It was so they could go to Hotel Street on the weekends and beat up the Howleys, and those Howleys were military guys, and I happen to be a Howley. But so it was kind of ironic that that's where I got my start, and that's where I started martial arts, and it formed me like it did, because that's how it started. So I mean, you could try to deny it. Oh, it was for self-righteous, we were this and that, and there were a bunch of bad guys in Kajukembo in the beginning. And when I say bad, I mean rowdy. They weren't like, I guess they were just a bunch of rowdy guys that like to fight on the weekends, and they tried their arts out, on Hotel Street. Anybody's been to Hotel Street, especially back in the day, they know that was the place where all the bars, tattoo shops, brothels, strip joints, that's where the hookers hung out in Hotel Street. And that's where the military guys went on their weekends, and they would, show up at the bar with the locals and, turn into a fight. And the locals started with the Kajukembo and learning their ways, their art. So it was a very violent art to me in the beginning. But since, everybody has their own moral compass, and what I took from it was the violent part of it to protect myself, my family, keep my lunch money and stuff. So I tried not to be the guy that used it for bad and to go down to bars and try it out. I used it more to prevent people from taking my lunch money. So that's a long-winded response.
It's okay. That's why I want you here.
20 minutes, that was honestly longer than my last sexual encounter. But anyway, all right. So who's next?
All right.
That's Kajukembo to me.
All right. So Rob, what is Kajukembo? What is your definition of Kajukembo?
What John just said. No, I'm just kidding.
Your last sexual encounter, or
kind of. I think Kajukembo is a philosophy, like Ron was saying. It is a mindset, and I think that mindset is to approach violence with greater, more explosive violence. It's not the way of peace. It's not the way of avoidance. It's, if you chest up to me, we're going to have a problem, and I'm not going to be done until you're on the ground. And even then, I'm probably not done. So I think that's a mindset, right? The mindset part of Kajukembo is overwhelming, explosive violence. So that takes it out from being Aikido. It's only barely Judo, only barely Jiu-Jitsu, right? It's about engagement and destruction. And then in practical terms, I think Kajukembo is a system that approaches striking through a mixture and in various orders of karate, Kempo, boxing, with a little bit of Kung Fu at the end, depending on which branch you're coming from, right? It approaches grappling mostly through Judo, and then Jiu-Jitsu, as in Japanese and Hawaiian Jiu-Jitsu styles. And then now we're starting to bring in some more Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then we approach weapons mostly from Filipino martial arts, as well as, again, depending on what branch you're from, Chinese styles. And of course, katanas, because everyone loves playing with katanas, right? But it's a system that approaches the three ranges of fighting, striking, grappling, and clinching through those various arts. You can't really do Taekwondo as your striking art and still call it Kajukembo. So that's where I think the system comes from. But I think within that, you have a lot of play, right? You can favor Kung Fu expression more than you can favor the Kempo expression, but it's got to be a mixture.
And then
that's where the young part comes in. Sorry to interrupt, but that's where the young, because when I started, and I agree with almost everything he said. It was because it was get him go to the ground and go to, Godin and the other Kajukembo guys that would train us always talked about animal instinct, and they would do their techniques on the ground, and there'd be this, that, get the eye socket. It was crazy shit. And, you know, a fucking 9-year-old kid, I'd be like, oh shit. But to me, in the older days, there was no soft art or kung fu. Like there was no Sifu, Sigung, Sijo, or any of that. That came later. I think was Dacascos or Eric Lee or something brought it to the mainland. But when I was in Hawaii, no instructor was ever called Sifu or anything. It was instructor, it was junior instructor, chief instructor, or instructor, senior instructor, then professor, then master, grandmaster, great grandmaster. And all the, you know, the taiukas and stuff, they'd call them taiukas and punch tricks and grab arts. And there was no Chinese anything really, except for in the descriptions. I'm sure in some of the older style, there was some Chinese boxing, some Chinese this, but I'd never heard Sifu until I came to the mainland years later. And I found out later it was some Dacascos, Al Dacascos, I think.
It was, because I was here in that area, in that 68-ish time, and that's when that happened. Gaylord was just known as Chief, and you know, that's how he used. He went from that to professor, but that's a whole nother story. Talk about that another time. But yeah, there was, the titles weren't there, and it was Al that brought in the Chuan Fa. He got a lot of those forms from Wong Jack Man and started incorporating that stuff in.
Yeah, we never had that back home, back in Hawaii. Back then, they probably have it now, but back in Hawaii, they never had any of that. Back in like Godin and Emperado, and none of those guys brought in that stuff when I was a kid. So.
Wait, Wong Jack Man, isn't that the guy who challenged Bruce Lee?
It wasn't so much the one that he challenged him, but he was the one that he fought. Yeah,
he's the one. Yeah. No, that was a long story, but he is the one who. He's not the one who originally challenged him, but that's the one who ended up showing at the place. Bruce Lee was upset that he had to chase him around a bit, and he wasn't really using an art. He ended up getting in a ground and pound, and it looked more like a regular MMA match instead of a kung fu thing. And lots of long story short, but that's running. The guy. Yeah,
he was actually running. So I got some of that story from Ming Lum. He was known as the Godfather of Chinatown in San Francisco. That's the guy with the hook hand, and he's one of the ones that set that up and went with him. So he was part of that China, but with Bruce, right? He was good friends with Al Novak, who was one of Bruce's students. So Gaylord used to take him out to lunch, and I would drive him. So I got to be that fly on the wall, hearing some of their stories. So that's a little bit of the fill-in that I got from that.
All right, so that's where that comes from. Well, to answer my own question, what is Kajukembo? I guess I'll start with how I came into Kajukembo. When very similar to John, I came from a really rough area of kind of the outskirts of San Diego, not the city, but North County. And it was a lot of gangs, a lot of gang violence, a lot of people getting jumped. So I already, before I got into Kajukembo, started my own fight club with my friends. And we were inviting people from local dojos just to dish it out. Like I wasn't studying anything. I just had sparring gear. Read books about boxing, and that's how I was doing it before. And every time I'd walk into a dojo, a kung fu school, whatever, I would walk in, ask them about their program, and if I didn't like what I heard, I would just walk out. Maybe they'd offer me a trial lesson, I'd stick around, and they'd make me do something I didn't necessarily like, and I would leave. And Kajukembo was the first place when I walked in. I'd always ask about sparring. When are you guys going to spar? And they said, oh, you can't start sparring until whatever, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in some contract. I'm like, all right, well, see ya. So Kajukembo was the first place I walked in. When I asked that question, I said, hey, when do you guys do sparring? Oh, this Friday. I'm like, really? Oh, yeah. Come on. Do I have to have like a cotton up? Just got to sign a waiver. Make sure you don't sue us if something happens, and you can get started. I'm like, all right, I'm in. And on my first day, I went in and came in just for like a Friday fight night. They had people from different schools, and they would just kind of set the rules per match if they wanted to do kickboxing, MMA style, or point style karate. And then they just start up. And that really made an impression on me. I got my ass kicked by a brown belt named Mike Shaw, and I've been doing it ever since. So like now when people ask me what Kajukembo is, I'm in Japan. That's such a fucking hard answer, like such a question that's like, oh fuck, like, okay. So I try to give them the acronym, but the acronym doesn't make sense to Japanese people because they're like, well, it's not karate. It's not at all. It's not karate at all. Like any Japanese person looks at what I do, they're like, that's not karate at all. Not what we're doing. And it's not judo because we know judo, and that is definitely not judo.
And judo no judo.
Yeah. And it's not Kempo because we have this thing called Shaolin Kempo, and it's nothing compared to what you're doing either. And it's definitely not boxing. So like, what is it? So I always tell them, okay, it's an American martial art. And I start with that so that they can kind of, okay, you need to grab whatever ideas you have and we need to throw that out the window. It's an American martial art. And then we can start having a conversation about what it is. So yeah, that's that's my answer to what is Kajukembo. My next question on the roster. What was Kajukembo when you started? And if I do a two-part, it's going to take forever. We'll just start with that one. What was Kajukembo when you started? And we're going to hand this question over to Ron.
It was pretty close to what I do now. I mean, we did do forms. He didn't do too much of the Chinese forms at that time. Gaylord didn't at all. He just stayed with his own stuff. A lot of the stuff he made up on his own. So that curriculum just kind of happened. Some of it was from the original that he got from when training with Joe Imperato and Paulie Cerrone and those guys, and he didn't have it all, so he filled in a lot of blanks. I just was having breakfast with my instructor Jim Juarez not long ago, and I was asking him about the curriculum and how it became the curriculum, because Gaylord never did the same thing twice. Throw a punch and it'd be different every damn time. Go, how do we learn this stuff? It's doing it different every single time. But that was kind of his point, actually. So it was actually Jim, my instructor, who started putting, taking the notes and putting the curriculum together. A lot of stuff from probably grab and punch tricks 1 through about 6 are pretty close. A couple of them are swapped, in numbers, but pretty darn close. And then the rest of the stuff was just filled in blanks. And I know that. But he was pretty good at filling in blanks, so that's it. It's same thing that I'm teaching now. Jim Juarez threw in a lot of the Chinese forms, so I hate them, but it's part of our curriculum, and I have a standard I have to live up to when I bring my people up. But I make sure they can fight. I make sure they can go home every day. I make sure they keep their lunch money, and with my SAFE program, that one has literally stopped 6 kidnapping attempts in the 20 years that I've been teaching it in the high schools. So I'm just teaching them Kaju. I'm teaching them how to block, how to hit back, and how to get the hell out of there. And that's it in a nutshell. Hit them, like my instructor said, hit them with bad intentions, and then get the hell out of there.
So John, you kind of mentioned it a little earlier, but what was Kajukembo when you started?
It was like if you could compare like the Karate Kid, the Cobra Kai guys, because they weren't the nice guys. And I mean, like Godin, when he'd have me enter tournaments, and he'd encourage me to punch in the face, and if I got disqualified, he'd cuss out the judge, the center judge or whatever. And we entered like 3 or 4. We hardly ever did it, but I mean, it was kind of a roughneck group of guys would walk around with their, we were the main guys that wore black gis. Everybody, Kajukembo with the black gis, and they were usually the bigger local guys, and it was a way to learn how to fight. I learned the hit fast and hit hard and hit all that, but it was never leave, you know. It was always just keep hitting them, basically, you know, until, I mean, if you know about Godin and those guys, it was kind of like that. So it was a rough style, but I think it would have been easy if I was a different like mentality, or if I had a different moral compass. I could have gone either way with that, because there's a lot of Kajukembo guys that ended up in prison. There's a lot of Kajukembo guys that not only didn't shy away from fights, you know, but would start fights, you know. So I think it was kind of I loved it because it saved me at a time where I needed saving, and it gave me confidence to go to my intermediate school, which was a very non-Howley school. And it made me feel confident because of what I was doing in the dojo, or the studio as we called it. And it just made me feel so confident. So when I started junior high school, where the roughness really started in our neck of the woods, it gave me an unbelievable confidence. And I always kept that Godin and that, you know, that kind of mentality going. And so it kept me from getting beat up, kept me winning fights. And I had a backyard thing like you did. My dad actually built put 4 stakes in the ground. We did ropes, and when guys always want to fight in Hawaii, guys in Hawaii always want to fight. There's always a fight in the back campus. So when I started kind of being the tough guy, I would say, no, you guys want to fight, you come to my house Friday night and we're going to spar. And after sparring, you know, you got to make up, but you can fight as much as you want, but you can't fight at school anymore. Because I was trying to play for whatever reason, like the boss of that. And we used to have fights at my house every Friday night. We used to just beat the hell out of each other. And it was all under Godin's tutelage. Everything to me was about Godin. I was there 5-6 days a week. And I hated the kata. I hated anything to do with the kata. So I told him that. I would say, how is that going to help me, Chief? And he'd go, shut the fuck up and keep doing it until you get your black belt. Then you don't have to do it anymore. But until then, shut up. And I was like 10 years old. I wasn't used to a grown-up talking to me like that, you know. So I did that. I kept katas until I got my black belt. And then I took them all out. I didn't think they belonged in our system. So by doing that, I wanted to stay true to Kajukembo and keep Kajukembo true. So I kept my roots, Kajukembo, and keep the mentality. We do the Kajukembo prayer still. And we do our Kajukembo, hit first, hit hard, that kind of mentality. But I took out all the katas, and so I called it Hawaiian Kempo. And I started that in 1985. And so I called it Kajukembo. I called it Hawaiian Kempo, but to me, it was like Kajukembo. Godin loved it. He loved the new system I made. He came to like my first 3 or 4 black belt tests that I promoted my guys to black belt, including Chuck's black belt test. And that was way before he was Chuck Liddell. You know, nobody knew him. This was like 94. But he loved the system that we created, and that really made me happy. So I got promoted by Emperado after that, and then I got promoted to 10th degree by Godin. I think I was 8th or 9th. Do you know, Ron? I was like 8th or 9th with Emperado.
I'm not sure. I think I'm honestly.
It's probably 8th. I think it was 8th. I think it was like master before grandma. I don't even know. But so I'm a Kajukembo guy by my lineage and by my attitude of fighting, training my fight team, training my students. But my system is called, Hawaiian Kempo. There are no katas. There are no punch tricks, nothing choreographed. But there is that killer instinct, and there is that hit first, and there's stuff for the street. Obviously, my fight team, right? There's a couple things that don't combine, but almost everything that I train my fighters transfers over to my fight, my my fighters, my Hawaiian Kempo class, but there are a couple things that don't. Like, I don't teach the eye gouging stuff to my fight team, but I do to my Hawaiian Kempo guys, right? I do teach arm bars off the mount to my fight team, but I don't teach that to my Hawaiian Kempo class. So there's some things that don't go over, but probably about 90+% do. Fighter, MMA to Hawaiian Kempo. And when people say Kajukembo was the first MMA, MMA to me, well, it's not just to me, it's the actual term. It's a sport. It's a sport. It's not a bunch of martial arts. I mean, literally you could say it's a mixture of martial arts, but it's not. When you say MMA, it is a specific sport, and there's rules with that sport, and it's
proper noun.
And it's called MMA, right? So like you could say, well, I do a mixture of martial arts. That's great, but if you do MMA, you're doing the sport, and so I don't think that a lot of people mix those up, especially when they had the tap out days and shit, and they would be teaching MMA, but it's not really MMA. So I kind of have a problem with that because I'm so involved in both that, and I like to separate the two, and I don't want people thinking MMA is, it's not what Hawaiian Kempo, or it's not what Kajukembo ever was. Hawaiian Kempo was the first mixture of martial arts, but it was never MMA. Like, you couldn't take an Kajukembo guy and throw him in an MMA match. He's going to be stomping on the guy's eyes and gouging him and shit. It's like, so it wouldn't turn out well. So anyway, that's a long story.
Before I hand over, I just had one more question though. You're still part of the Kajukembo tree, so like all your black belts still end up on the Kajukembo lineage, right? It's all part of the same thing. So they're Kajukembo guys. They're still by definition they're Kajukembo guys.
Yeah.
They're on the tree, right?
And they're very proud of that.
Yeah,
they're very proud of that. So is Chuck and Glover. They're very proud of that lineage. And I mean, I have the family tree, a huge one on my wall right there, and they love going and looking at where they are and stuff. So we are part of the lineage, and I would love to call it Kajukembo, but I wasn't being true to it because I took out the katas and all the things, the proprietary things that were proprietary to Kajukembo. So if I'm not doing, this kata, this taioka, this grab art, this punch trick, then I don't think I have the right to call it Kajukembo. And that's why I didn't. I wanted to real bad because I wanted to keep the name Kajukembo, and I wanted to keep the lineage, the patch. I love everything about Kajukembo. I mean, it's my life, but I felt I wasn't being true to it because I was taking away its katas. I loved its katas. I thought they were cool. I just didn't think they belonged in a curriculum that was teaching people to defend themselves, because that time that I could take away from the katas, right, or I would spend on the katas, I should be teaching these guys how to fight. And if I had extra time and they did an extra class, like maybe I did an upgrade class, maybe I would do katas. But right now, all of my focus is on staying safe in the street. Don't let anyone take your lunch money. And then conditioning is huge. And then for my fighters, obviously, they're not going to be doing katas. So that's where I spend all my time. So I had to do away with the katas. So that's why I named it Hawaiian Kempo. I wish I could have kept it Kajukembo in stealth and still felt good about myself. But I couldn't. I thought I'd be a phony Kajukembo guy.
Not at all, John. The katas weren't there originally, and it was still Kajukembo, right? So that's the whole thing. That stuff all came much later, and doesn't. And honestly, you're right. Doesn't have to be there.
No, I don't think it does. But it was from when I was in Kajukembo, and I started Kajukembo. It was there. So in my mind, that's what and you had to learn this kata and this punch trick for this belt. And I didn't want anything to do with that in mind. So I wanted to keep my, the Emperado and all the Kajukembo guys, and So
Yeah.
anyway, that's why I did that.
Well, without that curriculum, my business wouldn't have survived this last year and a half, because the grab arts, the punch tricks, the kata, that's what kept feeding me for the last year and a half, because I lost half of my class, but the class I didn't lose 100% because we had things to work on. Some of my
Why'd you learn
black belt material at this point.
Where are you? Where are you?
I'm in the Bay Area.
Oh God.
Yeah, exactly. So
we're twice. We gained students.
Yeah,
we gained students because
not where I'm at, bro.
Refused to close. I know. It's like tyranny there.
You have no idea. The kids are still wearing masks every class. I'm not anymore, and they have the option, but their parents. I'm in a very affluent area. I'm at the bottom of the hill, the most affluent area in my city, and it's pretty liberal. It's all I can say. Although the ones that have stayed with me for the most part, the kids are only wearing the mask because they're used to it, and it's still an indoor requirement in my county. But they actually lifted it a while ago, but nobody's listening to it, and everybody's still wearing it. I have natural immunity, so hey, I don't care, man. It's just me.
Yeah, our town is lucky, and I'm lucky too. I made a big stand, and showed up with the guns during the BLM riot. I mean, so that all combined with the mask thing. Refusing to take off wear the mask, refusing to close the door. The other three martial arts schools in my town shut down. And we refused to close. We refused to wear the mask. And then came that gun thing where we had the BLM thing. So we were lucky because it turned around into this thing where people said, "Hey, you're protecting our community. We really like you." So we're busier now than ever before. We were so lucky, but it could have turned the other way.
Yeah.
I'm just lucky. I thank God it didn't.
Well,
so
my landlord didn't work with me, so I had to shut down. I shut my doors. I landed on my feet with a friend that told me to come in with him, so I share space with him now, and I'm blessed beyond belief to have that opportunity. But if it wasn't for Zoom, I would even had the 20 that stayed.
Yeah. And to me, Kajukembo, it's my mentality, everything I do.
Yeah.
I mean, my fighters, my fight team, you could ask Joe Rogan when he talks about me. Everything he's saying, you can tell he's talking about a Kajukembo guy.
Yeah.
He's talking about our conditioning, the way I drill my guys so hard, fighting techniques, we drill it so hard, fight to the death. We talk about always hit first. So to me, that's all the mentality of Kajukembo, and I owe everything to that. And I thank God every day that I wake up for Kajukembo and for the what is inspired and inbred in me. And Godin, he might have been a terrible person. Godin, my instructor, was a bad person. He was a sociopathic, very, very violent person. I've seen him do horrendous things to people, nothing to do with the sport. And as a kid, that really shaped me a lot, watching him do things to people that owed him money for this or that. But that was the way it was back home. And I was like, I just knew it wouldn't affect me, and I wasn't gonna be that guy, but I was gonna take his toughness. I wanted to take his toughness and his killer instinct and his animal instinct that he taught me. I wanted to keep that, but keep it only doing it for good or for right, So I thank God every day for Kajukembo and what it taught me and how it taught me to be tough. I would have been wearing a fucking flannel or a floral dress right now in a corner. I swear to God, I'd be in a corner right now. And I'm nothing against gays. We call them mahus back home. Nothing against them, but I would probably have turned out that way because of the way I was getting beat up and shit. And I'd be sitting in a corner right now, and my wife, instead of being my wife, she would be my partner, and she'd be throwing stewed tomatoes at me every night. And I don't know why, but I thank God for Kajukembo every day because of that.
I could see the the psychology major in Angelo just exploding right now.
What'd you get out of that, Rob? What'd you get out of that?
Oh man. Okay. So
I'm curious.
just kind of backpedaling back to the original question. So
I
Rob,
lost track.
so Rob, before the tomato throwing floral dresses, how did you get into Kajukembo? Not wow. What was Kajukembo when you started?
I joined Kajukembo in 2006 or 7, right after the Fight Quest episode had just come out. So there was like that big boom of people talking about Kajukembo. Now, my instructor, Tony Morell, he had one of the oldest gyms in Austin, period. And it was next to my house. So I kind of always knew where it was. I always knew what it was. And I always knew who he was. But I didn't have any interest really in Kajukembo before I saw Fight Quest. You know, we have a Kempo gym on like every other corner in this town. And so it's like, all right, there's guys in black gis kicking each other in the nuts on every corner. So I'm not really interested in Kajukembo. It's just a different name, right? Then I saw the Fight Quest episode and I was like, oh, that's not what Kempo looks like. That's way cooler. So I decided to go sign up. I had already been taking Taijutsu at a different place, and I didn't like that at all. I didn't like the way it was run. I didn't like the instructor. I went for a trial class at Kajukembo, and Tony was riding high on the fame that Fight Quest brought, right? Like he knew people were coming in because they wanted to see like MMA in a gi. So that's basically what he was doing. We were doing sprawls. We were doing, 1-2 hooks. We were doing low kicks. That kind of tapered off as people stopped watching Fight Quest as it went off the air, and he went back to teaching more traditional karate style movements. There's a lot more kata coming in. But when I first joined, that was all we talked about. That it was MMA for the street. And we were fortunate enough that he was also partnered with a boxing gym. So it was like you would do Kajukembo from 6 to 7, and then from 7 to 8, you could go do boxing. So then when we cross-trained with them, he had a thriving jiu-jitsu team. He was a jiu-jitsu brown belt when he passed away, unfortunately. So we would also do a lot of jiu-jitsu. And it really was just MMA for the streets, which again, I think ethically we can argue about, should you really just ride high on a TV show giving you fame for a little bit or giving the style fame? Maybe not. But, you got to strike while the iron's hot. People were coming in the door for that. So do it. I don't know if you guys saw the drama I was getting into in a Kajukembo group on Facebook earlier today. Martial arts is a business like any other. We got to have people coming in the door. And if they're coming in the door because they saw a TV show featuring your gi, then you got to give them what they want, at least to get them to sign up for a month, right? We got to keep the lights on. And he told me one day after I got my black belt, we're hanging out, and he's like, listen, like at the end of the day, I want to teach traditional martial arts. Like I like self-defense. It's a big part of this style, but I like teaching punch counters. I like teaching the kata. And so, I could see that become what his focus was. Now he put a big emphasis on making sure we knew how to defend ourselves, but also he was like, at the end of the day, this is just something that's fun for me, and this should be something that's fun for you. I respect that. That's not what I want it to do. That's not what I want Kajukembo to be. That's not how I teach, but I respect that he's being honest about what he's doing. So at least when I joined Kajukembo, it was, again, riding high off of Fight Quest, which, again, we can go back and forth about how accurately portrayed Kajukembo, how favorably portrayed it, but it did ride high on it. People rode high on it. Now I see a shift where a lot of Kajukembo people, especially in Texas, I don't know what it is about Texas, it's just become point fighting. That's all anybody wants to do around here.
So, Rob, I don't know if you know this, but I think Ron
I do.
Ron has a lot to say about what you just said.
I know who I'm talking to.
One person I hated the show. I hated every minute of it, and for a lot of different reasons. But yeah.
Would you care to explain why, Ron? Because the listeners don't. I know the background here, but if you just want to share what Fight Quest was and what your involvement was in that, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. I was on the set with Gaylord's group. I was there all 7 days of shooting. We did a lot better stuff than what ended up in the 12 minutes or so that we did the show. I came away with that show with a concussion, 3 separated ribs, and I couldn't hold my arm up for a week. So if you saw the show, I was a guy that was getting blasted on the arms when Gaylord's hitting. And trust me, that wasn't planned and it hurt. Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. It was Hollywood. It was a show, and the producers got what the producers wanted. That's all I can say about that. You know, it's I didn't get any students out of it, and as a matter of fact, had a whole lot of explaining to do to my parents that were with me that did see it. Yeah, it wasn't my favorite show or time for a lot of those reasons. They changed a lot of stuff. Eric was supposed to be the final fight. You know, the elbow. That's my Eric. And that was supposed to be the final fight, but they changed it on the last day. I mean, literally on the last day. They didn't want any part of him, and rightfully so. He wouldn't have Jimmy wouldn't have lasted, and didn't last more than 30 seconds with Eric. But you know, there was quite a size there difference. But we saw what he did when he tried the sprawl. He did Kajukembo, right? Jimmy tried to take him down. He brought him down, and then came to Kaju. He drove that elbow. And I had to drive him to my other black belt, who's a chiropractor massage therapist. We fixed him because, trust me, it didn't take him 5 minutes to get up. It was a good half hour or more before he got his body up off the ground. We broke him, but we fixed him. You know, got to have those healing arts along with the hurting arts.
And then for anyone listening, watching on YouTube, I can't bring it up because YouTube will pull me off, but I am going to put a link here or here a little later, so people can go ahead and check out that episode of Fight Quest on YouTube.
I'm interested in what John thought about the show.
Did you see the show, John?
No, but one of my guys, there was the Kaju Pit guy, Greg Harper, right? He was in it, right? Yeah, that's a Kaju Pit. He had a Kaju Pit. He had a pit in Fresno area, in the valley.
Yeah, Visalia, I think, or
something like that. So he's one of my guys, and he called me about it, and I wasn't really that interested. But then I think there was so much stuff going on with that's when I got all tied up with the UFC stuff. I think it was around that time because I remember that coming out, and I remember Greg Harper was in it, you know, my Kaju Pit guy, but.
They did some pretty cool stuff over there. I mean, the stuff that they filmed was that's probably what brought you over to it, Rob. You know, Gaylord was the old guy, and he was the one that was supposed to show the traditional Kajukembo as opposed to the modern version of it. So, you know, like I said, the producers got what they wanted.
I can send you a link later, John. You can check it out. They have like a highlight reel. It takes like 10 minutes to watch. So when I got into Kajukembo, what it was when I came in is exactly what I described. It was all about sparring for me. Of course, my instructor did have the katas, and he did follow the lineage of what he was taught as far as katas, but he wasn't big on katas. He didn't teach them all, that's for sure. How many piñons is there, Ron? Do you guys know how many piñons there are?
We have 15.
How many are in the record? I think it's 20. I think I have the DVD set somewhere, but it's like 20 sets.
Piñons.
Piñons, like
piñon. Then there's Taiokas.
Yeah.
And there was
the ABC.
There was grab bars, punch tricks, and something else.
But, and there's like 20 of each. There's like 20 of each of these things, right? So my instructor felt that was just he said there's no way. There's no way, even if I did, and he knew them, because that's how he came in around the 80s. And he was taught all 20 of grab arts, all 20 punch arts, all the piñons. And pretty much what he told me, now Professor Ronnie Isagiri, was, you know, at the end of the day, I teach you all this. If I teach you all that stuff, you're just going to forget it later anyway. So, like, to have a connection to the other Kajukembo guys, I'm just going to make it so that you only have to learn 4. He taught me 5, but at the time it was 3.
4.
Now, 4. So he taught me 4, but at the end of the day, like, he officially taught me 3, and I learned the other 2 later. But it wasn't it was just like, you have to learn these piñon sets. They were called palamas. They were called something else at that. They were compared to piñon. They're a little different. And then he asked me, okay, and then from there, pick a form. You can just go on YouTube. You can pick a form. Like if you want to do a wushu form, look it up, and then we'll see if you want to learn that kind of form, you can if you want. And then from there, he was just really focused on self-defense and fighting. That's what he really cared about. And then even out of the punch arts, it was 10 punch arts and 10 grab arts that probably don't even coincide with the 1 through 10 on the DVDs. But when I looked at it, it's like one of the 20. So like, that's all he cared about. Oh yeah. 5 club techniques, 5 club defense, and 5 knife defense techniques out of the, I think like 10 or 15, that's probably in the original curriculum. And that's what it was. And then a lot of sparring. A lot of continuous Kajukembo sparring. Meaning, like you said earlier, very loose rule set. Try not to put anybody in the hospital. So like we're going to try not to have anyone have to spend money for a doctor's bill tomorrow, but try to get as close to that as we could. And that's, and sometimes we failed and ended up in the hospital. And that's just what it was. No mats, grappling on carpet with concrete at the bottom sucks. I can say that. I was really happy when I got my gym and I got mats. I was like, I'm getting mats. This is gonna be nice. But yeah, and just a lot of hard training. And as that was my generation, and I'm coming in around 2000s. We'll say 2000s, around the early 2005-ish area, 2003-ish area is when I got into this. So in the early 2000s, that's what he was doing. And he had his own studio, but I did notice a shift when we had to start getting into the rec center programs. They really didn't like the idea of kids doing the Kajukembo sparring on the hard ground. But it was interesting because in the rough neighborhood of Escondido that we came in, those parents wanted that. In the nice areas where the rich white folk were, as I like to say, they didn't want that. Those are the people saying, we want more kata, we want more kung fu. And so as Rob was saying, following the business model, that's what my instructor would. And he told me when he first brought me to the affluent area that we taught at, he's like, this is a different breed of Kajukembo people. So just remember that. And remember, like when you're talking to the parents, this is a different breed of Kajukembo parent. So don't talk to them the way we would talk to them. Like, because in Escondido, that's what I talk to parents spoke Spanish sometimes. I tell them in Spanish, esto para pelear, this is to fight, and this is gonna for the gangs. And I tell them in Spanish, this is gonna get your kid, this is gonna keep your kid safe. It's cool. But saying that to the affluent parents, that just kind of scared them. Well, they're looking at me like I was a thug because I'm coming from that area that they had a giant gate and a giant bridge and a lake. It separated us from all that. So yeah, they were. It was a different breed. And as time went on, of course, those programs paid the bills more. So those were the programs that became more affluent. So those were more under the point karate sparring with the light touches to the face. But I do remember one funny story when a few generations later, we were in the affluent area, and one of the kids from the affluent areas would come cross train with us in Escondido, in the rough area. And she was told to head class one day. And she's making the kids hold horse stance for like 10 minutes or something because they weren't doing it right. And she's like, squat down lower. And some of the kids were shaking. Some of the white belts were like falling over. And then we were done. And well, some of the adults couldn't hold it. She's yelling at the adults, what's wrong with you? And, and I just sit there, like, trying not to laugh. And when we were done, we all go to the corner, and one of the adults looks at me, and she's like, he looks at me and he says, Drew was a militant with the training today. And I'm like, she didn't give you push-ups. You didn't have to do knuckle push-ups, and she didn't punch you in the stomach. I think we're doing pretty good here. So, I mean, it's changed though. To say the least, it did change according to the area you're in, and as time went by. We definitely, I think John has a lot to say about, we talked about last time on the last podcast about that really hard style training where people were getting hurt, and trying to keep that hard style conditioning and that killer mentality without having your students end up with brain injuries. And I think that's a hard balance for some Kaju people. Yeah, or have it turn and not have it turn into Taekwondo. I think that's the challenge, right?
Well, the holes in the wall will either bring people in or deter them. But the holes in the wall are telling always. You know, you walk into a school, it's got holes on the walls. You know what's coming.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah.
John, you're about to say?
Oh, yeah. I noticed that, or I didn't notice, like where I grew up, it was one way. And then when I first opened my first backyard gym, it was a really affluent neighborhood. I was already done college and I was, I was working full time and I had some money and it was a nice area, Woodland Hills, California. And I've been used to, Palolo, Kamiki, all the roughest areas. But to be honest, like the guys still wanted to train. They were yearning, maybe because they knew my style or had heard about me because I was already a professional fighter and stuff. But the guys that came, even in Woodland Hills or Arroyo Grande, they want to train just as hard. They want that, they want that same mentality. They want me to train their kids hard. You got a soccer mom here and there, they're soft, but you get those on the other side too. But I feel like it's what they want more than like if they grew up in like a different area. Like if you look at the UFC, you look at boxing, it's all ghetto guys, right? I mean, I boxed. I had how many fights? I never fought a white guy in my whole boxing career, amateur and pro. But it's not to say one's tougher or one's tougher or meaner, because then there's also those rich kids that went to the nice colleges that wrestled at upper level wrestling. They're every bit as tough. So more of them came into the UFC. So the UFC isn't full of ghetto guys that are really tough. I mean, a huge majority of the fighters in the UFC were affluent, growing up, and they went to college and had, they wrestled, and, the wrestling career is over after college. They had nowhere to go. They wanted to keep competing. So they, parlayed that into MMA, and now they're UFC champions, and they grew up, super around. One I'll think of off the top of my head, Carlos Condit, or Cerrone, two of the known toughest, not the best necessarily ever, but definitely they're in the toughest category, and they both grew up, very affluent. But so I just don't see that as much as the people that see your style and they want their kid to train like that, so we didn't have a really affluent area we're in, or not. We're very middle class. But our kids, man, the kids that come in and the parents, they want their kids to train. They want their kids to keep their lunch money. They want, I have more complaints or requests. Can you be harder on my kid than I do? Can you be not as hard on my kid? So, because they want that respect, they want that confidence, they want that discipline, and they want the toughness, mental and physical. So I see that as that's what our artist is. So, and I'm not against kata. I like kata just like I like pop locking. They're both fun to watch, but I feel like unless that's your full-time job, and most of your students aren't, you're lucky to get them for 2 hours a week. And to me, even if I take time away from the striking, the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu, and the physical conditioning, those are my 4 tenets of my system. And those 4 have to be addressed. And those 4 have to be, that's what I test on. So if I took I don't have enough time in a class to take any time out of my striking, my wrestling, my jiu-jitsu, or my conditioning, or else if I had extra time, I would do katas all day long. I'd do musical katas and I'd fucking pop lock and all kind of shit if I could. But my guys don't have enough time. They're busy working people and they don't have the time to do something that's not going to save them if they get carjacked at Walmart parking lot at 9 at night while they're trying to get ice cream and milk for their wife. Now their wife's in the car. You get the shit kicked out of you, and you don't know how to fight in front of your wife. Guess who's not getting what at home anymore? Yeah. Do you think your wife is gonna still look at you the same if you get your ass whooped and you don't know how to fight? No, she might say, oh, honey, I still love you the same. But her mind is thinking, how did I end up with this beta bitch? So that's why training is so important. I'm just saying.
Actually,
Just saying. I'm just saying.
You're doing. I think you're doing much better than you did last time. You've definitely focused that point much better.
Oh yeah, it means a lot to me. Believe me, having a wife, I know.
So, Rob, any thoughts on this?
What are we talking about? John just talked for like 15 minutes.
Everything I talked about. Because it must be important if I said it. Right?
I agree with John.
Okay. So go ahead, Rob.
I was gonna say, I mean, we were talking about the affluence versus, you know, the poverty of the clientele, right? The dojo that I just left, there was a sharp divide, not between the students and the coaching, but the owner. The owner himself grew up very affluent. He had a lot of money. And our clients, we're all middle class, like lower middle class to middle class. And he wanted to teach exclusively kata and point fighting. You know, he said that's where Kajukembo has made its bread and butter. I don't know how true. I don't know what he trained in that he thinks that's what Kajukembo is, but that's what he wanted to do. He said that's what parents want. That's what kids want. And I would have the parents pull me aside and be like, can you please just have our kids punch each other a little bit? Like, they look miserable and they're not learning anything useful. You know, you have self-defense above the door, but I don't see how this kata they're doing to kung fu fighting is going to help them learn to defend themselves. I had one mom crying because her kid was being bullied at school, and she's like, he doesn't seem to know what to do. Like, you guys are spending the whole hour just working on forms and how to do the splits. This isn't helping him. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, he wants to teach for tournaments. But I don't think necessarily, going back to what you were talking about, Angelo, I don't think the question, and John, you and I talked about this before. We had a Zoom call a couple weeks ago. Hard training, I don't think, has to mean beating your students up to the point that they bleed. Hard training can be anything, right? It can be physical conditioning to the point where their body is like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Or it can be sparring over and over again. Or it can just be a class that's so fast paced with minimal rest that it's, again, just intense. Hard training is whatever the instructor wants it to be. And I think the easiest thing to do is say, I'm going to beat my students up, or I'm going to make them beat each other up. That's the easy answer. We don't get paid for the easy answer. People don't come to us because we do the easy work. They come to me because they know I'm staying up every night trying to figure out what's the way to deliver the best information the best way possible. And I think whatever an instructor decides their hard training is going to be, again, physical conditioning, intense pace, even shouting, right? Militant shouting can make a class very intense. I think the gauge is how entertained, for lack of a better term, are your students? Are they having fun? Because if your class is hard, but everyone's miserable, they're not going to come back. They don't care. You know, there's so many people that tell me that Kajukembo will never grow because kids these days can't handle the intensity. It's like, no, it's because nobody is fucking entertained. It's because you're making them sit in horse stance for 10 minutes and then hitting them in the bicep until they can't lift their arm anymore. And then in sparring, you're throwing a dude into the wall and he can't go to work tomorrow. And he's like, well, I'd rather just go do jujitsu down the street where we can roll every single night. I never get injured and I have a great time and I'm learning skills faster. I think, you know, it's kind of a no-no thing to say, but a student's entertainment and engagement level is probably the most important thing in terms of running your class, because then you can do whatever you want. If they love the fact that you're screaming at them, great, keep doing that. If that's not connecting, find something else to do.
Yeah.
You must have been to a few of my classes, huh?
I did study at the Pit here in Austin.
Yeah.
Ron?
You want to say something, Ron?
Yeah, after when you're done, John, go ahead.
What I want to say is I agree with almost everything there, and I don't think you have to get punched in the face anymore. That was a mainstay of my training growing up. That was a mainstay of my training my people in the old days. Somebody would end up in the ER at least once a week. I'm not even exaggerating. And you could read Chuck's book and he'll tell you there's some stories in that, but I don't believe that has to happen anymore. I do believe you have to be entertained or the kids aren't going to learn anything they're going to go and get the shit kicked out of them all the time. They're going to grow up to be betas. And we don't want that. That's our main goal, is we do not want betas. We want to turn betas into alphas. But one thing that has to be super hard is the conditioning has to be super hard. And that conditioning has to be related to martial arts, whether it's punching and sprawling over and over. You have to get an anaerobic response to your workout. You have to be anaerobic, or when you get jumped, you will not respond well. After about 20 seconds, you'll be completely winded. And no matter how strong you are, how tough you are, how nice that Ferrari is, if it doesn't have any gas, it's not going anywhere. If you don't have any gas, your fight is over. If you watch Glover's last fight, he broke him in the first round. I didn't even go in the cage in between rounds because I knew he won already. I didn't want anything to change. He broke him in the first round mentally. And a lot of that had to do with the conditioning. When all things are equal, conditioning will make the difference in winning or losing the fight. And so you have to be hard conditioned with your training. Like, you have to muscle memory punching, or as soon as you get tired, you're going to do this. Whereas you can do this all day long when you're cool, when the music's playing. But as soon as the fight starts, your adrenaline starts pumping, you get hit once or twice, and you start thinking, oh shit, I'm gonna die now. Then you start punching like this if it's not in your muscle memory. And if the fight's not over within 20 seconds, if you hadn't trained your students so hard anaerobically, not aerobically, anaerobically, they're gonna lose. Whether it's in the cage, my fighters in the cage, or even more important, because the consequences are much higher in the street. It's life or death. In the cage, it's winning a UFC title or not. So I put a lot more emphasis on that street. And conditioning is everything. Conditioning is my kata, because that's how I test for every belt, is conditioning. And it has to be progressive, and it has to be going up, or they're not gonna promote. And the reason is because I don't care if they know 10 katas to get their next belt. I want them to be safer each belt. And conditioning is, to me, it's the swing. It's what makes it or breaks it. And you do have to have fun. And if you're not having fun, upbeat, sometimes in my waiver, there is a sexual harassment clause, because I say a lot of things that are off color. Not color like race, but off color like, they could rub people the wrong way. But sorry, that's just the way I teach. So you have to have fun, but you have to teach really, really, really effective techniques. And those things together, boom. Then we got Kajukembo right there covered. Bing, right?
Yeah.
We just came up with it. Us four right now. Oh my God. This has just changed the martial arts landscape.
Make it fun, keep it effective. Boom.
Thanks.
We could have just ended the podcast with that at the very beginning. So Ron, you were gonna add?
Well, just on the affluent thing, because the kids really want it. I really do think so. When I was at the San Leandro Boys Club, which is right next to Oakland, so I mean, it was mostly Oakland kids that was coming, Big Eric included. It was, these kids some of them came from, rough neighborhoods. Some of them didn't, San Leandro was kind of right in the middle, but they were all good kids. But, I have a joke now that I used to make bad kids good. Now I make good kids bad, because we're still sparring I like to spar with no gear whatsoever. Because they're going to get hit. It changes the complexity. It makes the control better. And luckily, I haven't been sued yet, and nobody's really gotten injured. Bust up lip once in a while. But my affluent people, they're drop and run, so the parents don't see what we're doing anyway. And they're the hell out of there, so they don't see what we're doing anyway. And the kids love it. And yeah, it has to be fun. Or you're right. We won't continue as a business. Music is a big part of what I do. I'm an old 70s DJ, club DJ, so I like to play music, and music is an integral part of doing that with it's, I work them hard. One of my kids right now that's started with me at like 10, he's like 19 now. He's in the fire academy, and he's killing it in the fire academy because he's stronger than everybody else. He's got more endurance. He's got more heart. He's dragging, and they're loving him. He's going to have a great career for the rest of his life with a great job. And he's a great kid with that's very strong, very mental, and just, keeps everything in tune. And that's our Kajukembo. It's what it does for these kids. John, you've been teaching a long time. We've been teaching a long time, and I could tell that story over and over and over again about so many of them, of what Kajukembo has given the next generation, Rob. I see your stuff, man. Your stuff is really good. I enjoy every single episode that you put out there. I don't comment a lot, but I'm always watching stuff. So, great job. Just, I'm going to give it to you right there, bro.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Yeah, no worries.
So, I had a final question, but y'all answered it. Now, I was going to ask you, what do you think the future of Kajukembo should be? But I think this last one kind of, it did. And maybe later I'll do a shorter clip of just that with that as a title, because I think that really does wrap it up. Have fun. Make sure it keeps some of that roots of kicking ass that needs to be there, which includes conditioning. Because who's the one who said, John, who's the one who says that what poor conditioning makes, what it makes? Cowards. Yeah, it makes cowards us all. Well, who said that?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. Either way, it's a saying.
It's so true.
It's true.
It's so true, and conditioning is overlooked. And if you replace kata for conditioning, you're just. I mean, it's not a good trade-off. And putting it in. That's my link. Like I said, that's what promotes people to the next belt, because they're getting better. Everyone gets better progressively, and their hooks are going to get better. All their groundwork, all their stand-up, all their this, all their, I have 4 systems, right? So we have 4 things. It's striking, wrestling, which is takedown or takedown defense. That's it. That's all wrestling is. It's you're going to take the guy down, or he's going to take you down, or you're going to defend it, or you're not. So that's the middle. That's the middle part. And then to me, jiu-jitsu is everything that happens once the fight hits the ground, right? Except for the striking, obviously, but position, submission, escapes, reversals, sweeps. So once it hits the ground, I just call it jiu-jitsu. And once it's standing, right, and you're hitting, it's striking. And then once you're trying to take the guy down, it's that. But the conditioning is the only thing that I actually test, that's actually quantified and qualified. Because how are you going to qualify a left hook? You're going to see if it knocks someone out. I mean, it's going to get better as time goes on, but you can't really qualify it. You can quantify it, do 1,000 of them, but you can't qualify it, because once my first group of black belts, Chuck Liddell, Eric Schwartz, the guy that beat Glover, that's how I met Glover. His first fight, he got beat by Eric Schwartz. And then I got a guy named Tony the Terrible and Rick Metzler, who has the Pit Malibu. After those guys, I mean, then my next group, I had like a 70 or a 60-some-year-old guy, and he did everything, but he didn't hit like Chuck or Glover or those guys. He didn't take down like them. So how do I qualify his left hook? He's going for his black belt, but it was nothing like Chuck's black belt when they were doing their stuff. So is it really a black belt? So it's their black belt. It's his black belt. So I want everybody to be their own black belt, because not everybody's going to be Chuck. I'll just use Chuck Liddell because that's my most, like Kempo with an N, which is not really a strong style of Kempo. It's kind of weaker than Kempo with an M, and I'll prove it right now. Their biggest claim to fame is Elvis Presley is one of their black belts. My biggest claim to fame is I got Chuck Liddell and Glover Teixeira as my black belts. Kempo with an M, always beats Kempo with an M. I just made that up. But
Which
anyway,
one is the king, though?
what?
Who's the king, though?
Yeah,
I'm just starting shit. I'm sorry.
or the money, or the most money. But I remember watching him once do something and thinking, and that's when me and Cecil Peoples used to argue about Kempo with an N versus Kempo with an M. Because you guys remember Cecil Peoples?
Yeah.
He's a referee and a judge, and he fought back in the day. But he has a school in LA. And when I started training with him, I was Kempo. I had the tattoo Kempo with an M. And he was like, Kempo with an M sucks. And we still argue in a joking way. But I was like, your biggest claim to fame is freaking Elvis Presley, And anyway, so mine was Chuck's. Hey, that's a Kempo joke. But anyway, Kajukembo is we got to make a research. We got to do something. What can we do? Let's do a brainstorm, or do some kind of group like a think tank, Shark Tank, think tank. How we can get Kajukembo back to saving the world, like it was supposed to. Well, beating up Howleys, whatever, same thing. Save the world, beat up some Howleys. All right, so back in 47. Now, how can we change it and still, for good, make it so it is the art? It's the martial art that everybody wants.
I think
that show didn't really do it, did it?
That's a really good question, because that was one of the things that kind of got touched on in the last podcast, is how marketing wise, nobody knows even now. I mean, in the martial arts circles, yes, arguably people know what Kajukembo is, but even now, like the greater public, I can tell you right now, no one in Japan does. They know Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I cross-train with Gracie Baja Jiu-Jitsu guys. They know what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is. They have no idea what Kajukembo is.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
The parent that's bringing their kids down, or teens or whatever, they don't care. It's closest to their house. They don't really care. I found that out when I was at the boys club. I just changed it from Kajukembo to just plain karate and tripled my enrollment, just because people then knew what that was. Nobody knew what the other one was.
I do think that there's a branding issue, unfortunately, that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Kempo on its own is at this point a term that everyone knows, right? But initially it was Kempo karate.
Yeah.
Everyone knew what karate was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tang Sudo, that makes up the karate portion of Kajukembo, was originally called Korean karate, right? Like, you can kind of understand what the shorthand for karate, what karate is a shorthand for. Kaju, as a shorthand, doesn't explain at all what we're doing. And so I think if we want to just like have people look at a flyer and understand what they're looking at, we got to change it to, people got to be more willing to say Kaju karate or Kaju self-defense or something, something that just right away tells you what it is. And I think there's so many people that want to say Kajukembo that's just, you don't understand how you're alienating people. Even then, I think if we just call it Hawaiian Kempo, not to jump on anyone's toes or anything, but I think Hawaiian Kempo also explains what it is. It's Kempo from Hawaii.
Then they could start learning more about their roots and the Kajukembo. Like my students, especially my advanced students, they know a Kajukembo. They know they're Kajukembo, but they knew they got into a system called Hawaiian Kempo. But they know what it is. So we gotta. That's a good. Once they get in the door, then we can start the indoctrination
right.
A little more of the Kajukembo way of life. The Kajukembo, like our Kajukembo prayer, we just started redoing it again because I've gone on and off with it since the beginning, and we did it twice a day. I don't know, Ron, was it like that when you were starting? You did it twice a day. Did you have a sergeant? Did you have the sergeant of arms that had to stand by the door?
Yes.
They had in a squatting position, a horse stance.
Yes.
Okay.
I really think that was.
Yeah, we did that twice a day, every class, the beginning of class, end of class, and I kind of lost track of that and didn't do it as much. And now one of my guys, I have a lot of guys that are so much more. They want to be traditional, much more than I do with the old school stuff. And he brought it back. He's like, can I bring back the Kajukembo prayer? You know, I think it'd be great for our students. They really like it. I go, you can do it, bro. He's going for his black belt soon. So he teaches some of the class and he does the warm up. So he does the Kajukembo prayer now, and people like it. You know, people are liking it. They like what it says. They like what what it means, especially this day and age right now. People need something to grab onto. They need something that they think is gonna, is gonna make them stronger, tougher, but also, more on a moral high ground, or a moral, or a righteous path. But they still want to be tough, and they know now, watching all this shit going on out there, that, sometimes things do get physical, So like my way of teaching, or my way of coming up with techniques and getting my curriculum going, was, in the old days, it was fighting in the street. But then when I started getting more popular, I had a lot of fighters. So I was like doing these techniques. I said, try this in your next fight, see if this works. I got Chuck had this certain kick that he worked on Babalu, then this other strike that worked on such and such. So it's like a petri dish where you can do all this stuff and then watch it grow. Or you could do or you could say it like you're teaching, you're seeing how it works in the real world. You're like, it's the acid test, So I could do that now because I had fighters. So I could, is that technique going to work? What if you do this? What are the takedown defense? And I was big on takedown defense back in the 80s. I mean, back in the 80s, I realized that when I opened my first gym and I told the first guy, when he said, what are the rules in sparring? I said, there's no rules, bro. And that's when I thought I was going to be the tough guy and I was going to be the original Kajukembo guys. That's how they did it, But I realized really quick, because I was a professional, I was like the #1 kickboxer in the world, and I was like, so I could kick people and punch them. So I realized real quick, they wanted to take me down real quick. Even somebody that never wrestled, maybe played football in high school, he knew a tackle. A tackle's a takedown, guys. It's the same thing. So I realized real quick that people were taking me down more than they were willing to stand up and strike with me. So we started working on takedown defense like in the 80s. So that's where you can start working your stuff. You see a lot of it in the street watching videos, but then you also can watch a lot of it in the UFC. Almost all the techniques translate to both or transfer over.
Well, we're going to wrap up soon here, but what I'm going to say before we go, I guess I'm going to have to do another podcast about what we can do about the future of Kajukembo, because we could obviously spend a complete hour just on that subject. So I will be like a to be continued. One day we'll get together with another panel and talk about what can be done for the market, like marketable Kajukembo, what that would look like. But I do want to thank Ron, John, and Rob for joining me to talk about what is Kajukembo. I think we definitely knocked that one out of the park. And
you defined it perfectly. No one can contradict us.
Absolutely nobody. I'm going to post this on the Kajukembo commentary, and everyone's going to agree, because that's what we all do, right?
Everyone's going to love me.
please let's not do another hashtag boycott the pit. Let's not do that. Let's not cause that again. I just got through that one. Anyway.
All right, well, to my listeners, thank you for checking out the show, and we'll catch you all next time. Peace.
Good to see you, John, Rob.
Hey, Rob. See you guys.
Good to meet y'all.
Guys.